All righty. Welcome, folks, to our fourth honors colloquium, I think that's right, of the fall semester. My name is Craig McCashin. I'm the director of the Academic Honors Program here at A&M-Texarkana, and I am very happy to introduce our two speakers today. First is Jacqueline Russell, right here. You come over in the light so they can see you. There we go. And the other is Dr. Angie Parmentier-Sikorski, professor of psychology. And today they're going to speak to us on a project that Jacqueline did as an honors student under the supervision of Angie on the gut-brain axis and psychobiotics.
Yeah.
Exciting times. So I will get out of the way, and then we'll have some time for questions, hopefully at the end. So enjoy. I'm going to shut the door too.
I just wanted to say a few things before Jackie begins. So Jacqueline is in her first year of graduate school in our counseling program, but for that, she was one of the best students that we've had in our undergraduate psych program. And I teach a class called Brain and Behavior, and it was last fall. Jackie was in my class, and we started talking about the enteric nervous system. So how many of you know what that is? How many of you have heard of the ENS? You've heard of the nervous system, right?
Yes.
Good. That's good. I'm glad that you good. But there's something called the enteric nervous system, and it's often referred to as the second brain. Because it has a whole bunch of neurons, in fact, like 200 million to 500 million neurons, so tons of neurons. And what we've been learning in the last several years is that there's this relationship between the enteric nervous system, which is basically our gut. All these neurons line our esophagus, our stomach, our bowels, and it controls all those types of functions. But what's interesting about it is that there's this relationship between our gut and our brain. So there's this communication between the enteric nervous system and our central nervous system. So the way that we behave, I guess you could say mentally to a degree, is related to our enteric nervous system and our gut health. And there's this nice cyclical relationship. So in the last several years, it's been a movement. That's kind of pun intended, but not really. We're talking about bowels. Sorry, that's kind of gross. You're all eating. I digress. So to talk about psychobiotics. So looking at the gut microbiome and how that can relate to our mental health, and administering various drugs to kind of help us in that regard. So as we started to talk about this, Jacqueline was really interested in it, and we shortly after we talked about this, about doing not only an honors project, but also doing her term paper over the enteric nervous system. And she did a fantastic job. And I'm very privileged to work with her over the last year or so, mentoring her. But this is all her work. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of kudos and introduce why we're here and what we're doing. And with that, I'm going to let Jacqueline have the floor.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. So Dr. Sikorski is really wonderful, y'all. If y'all have taken any of her classes, you really should. She's awesome. As she was saying, I kind of got introduced to this in her class, Brain and Behavior, which is a wonderful class as well. And I just noticed that there was a lot of things in my life that were kind of central to how my gut was different based on kind of how my mood was. And a lot of times, if your diet was really awful or really bad, your mood would kind of change with it too. And so it just kind of made me start questioning it and kind of wondering. And then I had just out of curiosity started taking probiotics, and I noticed a lot of differences in my body, as well as my sleep, my mood, a lot of behavior. And so it really made me curious when we were talking about it in her class, and I was like, well, I would really like to do some more research on this. So I spent the whole last year in my undergrad researching, the effects of the gut, the brain, the access to bidirectional communication. So I've been researching that this whole past year and kind of looking at it and finding out more information. So let's see. I don't know if you can click something else. I'm just going to come over here and click it.
Yeah, I think you have to make it like a slideshow and then
Do they get press present maybe? There we go. That's better. Okay, so for the introduction, just kind of, I know y'all can read, but so much of the human body is interconnected, and the gut isn't really any different. It's directly linked to our brain. And this link has several different mechanisms which increase and it increases the individual's mental and physical health as well as their cognitive function. And this is the bacteria and everything that's in your gut is called your microbiome. And so the microbiome of the gut has to be healthy in order to produce a healthy individual. So when the balance is disrupted, obviously the individual is going to suffer from all sorts of physical, mental, any kind of issues like that. And psychobiotics are actually pioneering new studies showing the effectiveness of their use in treatment for some of the mood disorders, depression, anxiety, things of that nature. And also, they're actually linking a bunch of research with this as well to schizophrenia and Alzheimer's, which I thought was really interesting because I never would have guessed your gut had anything to do with Alzheimer's or schizophrenia. But there is a lot of research out there actually showing that and proving it, that there is a connection. So it might not necessarily cause it or cure it, but it does, lessen or worsen. It can make an effect on it. So future research can provide more information detailing this correlation between the gut and the health of the brain. You can't understand. Okay. So just some information about what we're actually looking at as these microbiomes in our gut. As humans evolved, so has everything with us. Our gut has evolved, everything concerning the human has evolved. So the microbes that are in our gut have evolved with us too. And this, is a symbiotic relationship. We are the technical host of the bacteria that's in our microbiome, and they just kind of live with us. And typically it's a very beneficial, mutual thing, which is why it's a symbiont. However, it can cause issues, which I'll get into that a little bit later from here. However, they help us break down our food. It's kind of the main easy jets of it. Some of the phyla that you can look at in these microbiomes are these here that are listed. This is not all of them. This is just some. There are a lot more. This was just kind of the ones that were really popular, really common, had the highest amount. So there's still plenty more. And so, as mentioned, the gut health is linked to the mind, the mental health, your cognitive function. So when it goes down, those things are obviously going to go down with it as well. And we're showing links with anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, Alzheimer's, many other health concerns. And what's also really interesting is that if you look, there has been research from 1987 up until 1997. And this was from Nadine et al. But the major depressive disorder diagnosis have increased from 37% to 74% just in that short period of time, which really shows you this is actually a really big deal. This was an American study, and they were showing the difference in how the American diet is actually getting really bad, and it's affecting our gut microbiome, which in turn is affecting our mental health, our cognitive functions. Sleep issues, all of that is interconnected. And so that's like a really huge difference just in a few years. And I thought that was really kind of impressive and scary at the same time, because nobody's really talking about this much. And honestly, the first time in Dr. Sikorski's class was the first time I'd ever even heard really about the enteric nervous system or anything about it. So I think it definitely needs a lot more attention than what it's got going on right now, because this is only going to get worse until people start realizing that there is something going on here, and also improving our diet to improve our gut microbiome in order to improve our mental well-being as well. Okay, so here's just kind of the what and why. What am I even talking about here? So this is the gut-brain axis, and it is connected to your central nervous system. and the gastrointestinal tract, which is all part of the enteric nervous system. And so there's a bidirectional communication between your brain, your gut. They both talk to each other. It goes both ways. And Simpson et al. Had found that there was links even on the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the tongue twister. So, and that is actually the system in our body that handles stress. So all of these things are, like, again, interconnected. So when one starts failing, the next one's going to start failing, and they just continually get worse. And so when there's an imbalance, the cortisol levels are going to go up. Cortisol automatically causes inflammation in the body. And so prolonged inflammation will alter your intestinal tract, and it actually makes your intestines more permeable to outside bacteria that's not supposed to be there. And that was actually, okay, I had my name up there. Okay, so yeah, so the permeability, all the bacteria can get in there more. And that's what causes the disruption in the body, is the fact that your intestines is now not keeping out what it needs to keep out, because it's all the cortisol and everything else and the stress and the inflammation that's causing this. So it's just letting things come in and out that aren't supposed to. So why should you even really care about this? And I think it's really important that everyone really cares about it, because as I said from the previous research studies, we're seeing that it's progressively getting worse, and not many people are talking about this. So the microbiome having issues in it with the bacteria that are in there, because of the gut health, that's going to cause the inflammation in the body, which causes the cortisol, and this keeps this cycle just changing. So the permeability of the intestines, the stress and inflammation, this is actually called endotoxemia, which is an immune response to the endotoxins that are released in the released from the intestines. So when that permeability starts having that issue, it's going to create these endotoxins and actually cause the endotoxemia. So, I mean, as we all know, stress has a huge effect on the body. It affects us every day, no matter what. And so lowering stress obviously is going to lead to healthier individuals. And our gut is just the same. It's just as affected by stress as the rest of our body and our mind is. And it was really interesting too that Arnett concluded that the microbiota of the gut alters the body system by altering specific neurotransmitters. So GABA is altered, melatonin, histamine, serotonin, and this one that I really can't pronounce, y'all. I'm not going to butcher it. So acetylcholine. There we go. Thank you. So yeah, there's some big words that are kind of hard to pronounce sometimes. So, but all of these neurotransmitters, they communicate with the vagus nerve, and the vagus nerve communicates with our brain. So everything is connected. So when one's off, all of them are off. And so I have some previous studies here, and Barros Santos et al. Had conducted several open field tests with male mice using Lactobacillus plantarum 286 and 81. And so what was interesting about him using these two different ones is where they came from. So they're two different lactobacillus. And he gave the Psychobiotics for 30 days and then conducted 4 swim tests, maze, discriminative avoidance tests. He measured anxiety, memory, and learning. And he ended up finding out that the Lactobacillus, the 286, was successful in reducing symptoms of depression, while 81 did not, which was really interesting because he's proving a point here that not all psychobiotics are equal in how they directly or indirectly affect the body system. So some are better than others. All of them have some kind of, there are good things, but some are definitely better than others, and you'll see a bigger increase or benefit from it than others. And the reason that he believed these effects would be due on the 286 was that they were producing species that suppressed another one of these hard words here, y'all. Chimerium. I don't know how you say that one. Yeah, which is converted in the brain to the same acid. Okay. And the both of them. And quinolinic acid as well too. So it's produced into that acid in the brain, and then both of those acids are responsible for the neuroinflammation and depression. So that was kind of what the difference was on why it was actually working with the 286 versus the 81. And on this one here, this was from Morris et al. And they actually worked with several other bacteria in their studies with humans and mice. And the GABA neurotransmitters, okay, so I'm sorry, they were affected by the serotonin. And both GABA and serotonin have neurological connections in the brain and affect the mood and mental health. So regardless of the majority of the serotonin production is in the gut, these neurotransmitters cannot cross the blood-brain barrier to directly affect the brain. The laboratory mice still showed decreased serotonin and its precursor tryptophan in the hippocampus, which is suggestive of the communication between the gut and the brain. So we're just kind of seeing how the neurotransmitters really talk between each other. Okay. And kind of continuing on that, we were looking at some of the specific psychobiotics and some information on them. The first one here, Lactobacillus reuteri, increases the oxytocin through the vagus nerve, which causes an increase in social behavior in mice. And then the second one was the Lactobacillus rhamnus, and it increased GABA through the vagus nerve, which decreases responsiveness and decreases anxiety and depression in mice studies as well. And then this one here, we'll just call it longum. It increased the BDNF, which is the brain-derived neurotrophic factor, through the vagus nerve, which also lowered anxiety and depressive behavior in mice. And then for the last one, the fragilis, it decreased the 4-EPS, which decreased anxiety and repetitive behavior while increasing communication. So these were just kind of some of the psychobiotics that were done in some of these tests that you could look at and see what their direct effect was within these studies that they did with the mice. So I made a proposal for a study that I was interested in doing, and with psychobiotics having these new studies that are showing this effectiveness of treatment with mood disorders and mental illnesses like schizophrenia and Alzheimer's, I thought future research could really help strengthen the correlation between the two. So the microbiota of the gut is plentiful, it's ever changing. It directly affects our health and our well-being. So taking part in the consumption of psychobiotics, which is also referred to as probiotics and prebiotics, the microbiota of the gut can create a chain of events within the body to sustain a healthy functioning nervous system. So this study kind of aims to provide research concerning the immediate or long-term implications of probiotic application in the human gut. So I just kind of wanted to see, for myself, kind of how a specific psychobiotic would affect people. And so for the method here, we're kind of looking at lactobacillus just itself because it's easy to obtain. It can be orally taken to reinforce the intestinal wall and promote anti-inflammatory mediators. So also in this study, we need to have a control. So have a placebo administered to the control. Group 1 will have the probiotic administered one time. And then group 2, I'd like to have the probiotic administered for 30 days. And all of the participants can keep a personal record of overall mood each day, so we can kind of see how things are changing. So this would be best conducted as a 3x3 mixed between subjects ANOVA test, comparing the means of the control, subject 1 and subject 2, to the mood variables of negatively affected, neutrally affected, and elevated mood. So the 3 mood variables will be assessed by a Likert scale of 1 to 7. So 1 to 2 is going to be the negatively affected, 3 to 4 is neutrally affected, And then 5 to 7 is positively affected result of elevated mood. So participants can may be selected by volunteering on campus. Background of participants should include screening participants for current gut health and mood status. Individuals with less than optimal gut health and mood would be preferable, but it's not an absolute. Any gender, age, or other backgrounds would be perfectly acceptable. So overall, what we're looking for here is that the amount of probiotic usage should have a direct effect on mood. The participants who take the probiotic should experience elevated mood and overall wellness, whereas the other groups should not. So my null hypothesis here being that the population mean of the immediate is equal to the population mean of those that are taking it for an extended period of time. So as for results, I'm anticipating the results to show that psychobiotic usage is going to increase the brain function and mood considerably immediately, and continue to do so for the group that has continuously administered it for 30 days. Group 1 will show an increase in brain function and mood elevation immediately after application. However, I believe it will subside after not continuing the dosage like Group 2 will. So I do also think that there will be a plateau in which the Group 2 will reach, but I do predict that a better examination of gut and health function should be applicable here. So our main goals on this for results is mood changes and amount of change over time. So as for continued discussion, there of course are limitations to this experiment that I'm proposing. And that's going to be including possibility for confounding variables, things that we really can't control. So diet of the people, we can't sit there and tell people what they can and can't eat every day. It's not really possible. So, and then also environment and culture, those are things that also can make it a difference in obviously our cortisol levels, because one person might be in a less stressful environment than another. So we have no way to monitor cortisol levels, which is directly impacted with the gut brain health and the permeability of the intestinal wall. So, and also if we're pulling volunteers from campus, we're going to have a small applicant pool. So that's not always the best idea. You can't avoid it. With a small selection of participants, it'll be difficult to get volunteers. So we pretty much will have to accept anybody that wants to volunteer, regardless of health, mood, or demographic. There's also a likelihood of outliers, because if we can't get enough people, the larger the study is, the less we'll have to worry about the outliers. However, if we have any outliers, they will need to be assessed for removal from the results with some limitation on why they were actually removed. So we have limitations here, and future studies are going to be required. And this was just kind of my references. If anybody needed to get more information on this, more than welcome to send you this information so you can see the research and read. And lastly, I just want to thank my sponsor, Dr. Sikorski. She's a wonderful person. If anybody needs an honor sponsor, you should absolutely give her a call. I have loved every class she has ever taught me. I've loved many of my professors in my classes, but Dr. Sikorski is really wonderful, and I really thank you for everything you've done for me. And lastly is just a little blurb about me. Again, my name is Jacqueline Russell. I graduated this past summer with my bachelor's in science psychology with my minor in criminal justice, and I am now currently in my master's doing clinical counseling. Well, I guess we're just going to leave it on that one then. So thank you all so much for coming today. I really appreciate it. I hope you guys kind of learned something about the gut and how it's connected with the brain, and let's eat better and get better moods. Thank you. Yeah, you got a question?
I do. I'm absolutely not going to be better. So I would much prefer a pill solution, like all good Americans. What is the difference between a pre and probiotic?
So a prebiotic is something you're going to take beforehand, and a so prebiotics are going to feed the bacteria that are in the gut, the microbiota. They kind of feed that. A probiotic is introducing more. So we're bringing more friends to the party with a probiotic, and we're just going to feed everybody at the party with a prebiotic. That's the best way I can think of it. But they're both really good. You should really do both if you can.
Other questions?
Yes, Dr. Layton?
I'm kind of interested in the Barros Santos article from 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And they were using mice, and they were looking, I think they were using like a maze task and a couple of other tasks.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that they had shown a decrease in depression. And I wondered how that's assessed. Like, is it you use anxiety as a correlate of depression, or sort of standing in place of depression? I know that anxiety is one of the symptoms of depression. So
I believe I'd have to relook at the whole article again, but I believe that it was something to do with the way that the mice actually interacted with the other mice. And if they just had no ambition, they just kind of, they were really kind of depressed, and they wouldn't get on the wheel, they wouldn't play, they wouldn't interact with the other mice, because they had it in like a group setting when they were doing these different tests.
okay.
And I believe that was what it was that they were just showing no lack of motivation.
Another, I can't recall if they did this in that particular study, but a good index of anxiety in animal models is grooming behavior. So when they're anxious, they spend more time licking their forepaws and kind of grooming their face. So they can measure how much time is spent in those particular activities to do comparison between those who have probiotics and those who did not.
Yeah, there was definitely several things that they were kind of looking at, like as a whole of like the mice behavior. I think it was their motivation and stuff like that was mostly for the depression, but it definitely could have been more. I don't remember that. I'd have to read the whole article again to answer that 100%.
Yeah. And in your discussion, when you were talking about your compounds, diet, stress, and so on, I mean, you might measure those things, but most likely, if you do random assignment, they'll be equally distributed across the conditions. So most likely they won't have a systematic effect on your results, but it's always a good idea to at least measure those things, and then you can check afterwards and make sure that there weren't any weird assigning people to conditions or something.
Oh, absolutely, definitely.
I think too that one thing that you could do to strengthen that is have participants keep a diary of what they're eating daily.
Yeah, and I think I had mentioned that before when I first started my proposal, but I forgot to put it on here because it was something I wanted them to kind of like write down everything, like mood, diet, like all of it. That way you could actually monitor it a little bit better. But without having people like in a lab, like you're eating this, you're doing this, and you're watching everything that they're doing, it is a little bit harder to kind of assess those things.
I'm sorry. Now that we have a more robust grants administration program, a grant from NIH or somebody to study this would allow you to go beyond the university.
Yes, absolutely.
Because I've been in a microbiome study that's run out of NYU, and so they do these sort of national studies, and so it's something that obviously is getting funding.
Yes, absolutely.
Caitlin, you have a question?
Have you thought about statistically adjusting for your stress levels and environment? So you could just run one set of data where it's just the raw data, but some studies will actually take a Likert scale of like, oh, rate how stressed your home environment is, rate how stressed your work environment is, and then you compile their responses with their stress level to kind of indicate that general stress environment, and then you I'm trying to think of how they do it, but it's like you basically make it where everybody's set to like the same stress level. And then you compare their gut reaction based on that.
That's really good feedback. I think that would be really good to add in there.
And I'd like to give a plug right now to Caitlin. She is a staff tutor, and that's exactly what she is. So she
Yes.
Yeah, well done, Caitlin.
Other questions? Yes, sir.
I was thinking the trial where it's the 1 time versus 30 days.
Mhm.
Would over time, if you had appropriate dosing for long enough, would it like retrain the microbiota to have more semi-permanent benefits, or would you have to continuously inject
Well,
to get those benefits?
it's a little bit of both. So as I was, discussing how like our cortisol levels and our diet kind of change and alter things. So yeah, you absolutely you can ingest it for X amount of time and it'll be beneficial and help. And then when you stop, it is going to kind of slowly go down though, because unless your stress levels have gone down and your health in general has, gotten better, then, it's still going to kind of move that way. So you're going to have to continually take it. So, but if you stop taking it and you're eating really healthy, you're taking like you said, you're wondering if you could just dismiss it completely. And I'm assuming we're making pro and prebiotics. So, yes and no, you could, but eventually you likely have to start taking them again to start seeing better results, because it is going to eventually, all that stress and the cortisol and everything is eventually going to build back up, just by living life, because no one has a stress-free life, so.
I'm a faculty member. I'm very close, at least according to most. One last question. Come along.
Okay, so I was thinking about the one that you had at kind of at the beginning in the what's in your gut, where from 87 to 97, there was like that huge increase.
Yeah.
Did you notice, like when you were doing your research, if there were any societal changes that happened around that time that caused that? Like, was it the rise of fast food or something happening? Was there something that happened that you think was connected to that, or that they think is connected to that?
Well, now, as far as my research, I did not personally research that. However, as someone who was born in 87 and has seen life progress at that point, I have seen the diet of Americans slowly get worse and worse, and fast food becoming a bigger thing. And so, I mean, just from my own personal viewpoint and my perception of what reality looks like is, what I think that really is. But no, I did not research that on its own as an indication to see what they were saying, what the research showed it to be. That was mostly just my assumption of things.
All right. That's a great point. Obviously, diet drives so much. Make sure you grab a cookie and coffee on your way out. I'm sure there's no irony there. But let's once again thank Jacqueline for a great job. And if you want to revisit this in the future, it'll be posted to our honors program YouTube channel presently, probably in about an hour. That's the idea. All right. Thank you, folks.